Recently, at least 25 officers have been prosecuted in some form or fashion in the cities of Austin and Dallas, all stemming from the George Floyd riots of 2 years ago. I've been in law enforcement for 26 years, nearly half of that as a supervisor, all of it with an agency that rendered assistance to Dallas PD in 2020. For our efforts, DPD rewarded us by filing charges on 2 of our officers as well, and at least 4 of their own. I was a lieutenant in the Internal Affairs Division when this happened, and we ran our own investigation alongside the DPD investigation. Now, since some of those charges are still working their way through the courts, I can't go into specifics, but I can comment on everything that's already in the public view. And since I'm doing a series on social collapse, or what the Bible calls the Great Tribulation, I think these events give us a powerful example of what is happening and why it's happening. Surprisingly, to me anyway, most of the comments I've seen so far are in favor of those prosecutions. But what exactly does it mean to hold officers accountable for something like this? Accountable for what exactly? And accountable to who? Unfortunately, everyone I've seen so far, even the defense attorneys and police organizations, seem to be a little fuzzy on this. So I'm going to assume that people are missing some basic foundational stuff, and I'm going to explain this starting from the very beginning. 1. What is a police officer? The world's first police department was founded in London in 1829 by then Home Secretary Sir Robert Peel. Founded on his famous 9 principles, it was meant to represent the community at large. Not one person, not one special interest group, not one race, no, everyone. Prior to the emergence of this concept, law enforcement came in 2 basic flavors: henchmen and mob rule. With the henchmen, in England, think of the shire reeve, from which we derive our word sheriff. Except that modern sheriffs are elected officials. Through most of England's history, shire reeves were appointed by landholding noblemen, and they represented the will not of the people, but of those noblemen specifically. On the other hand, representing the mob in England was the hue and cry, which was anyone and everyone with a weapon meeting up in the town square to very often go lynch somebody. For my biblical scholars, the henchmen in the New Testament are the Roman soldiers. No specific law enforcement agents back then, of course. No, Roman law was enforced by the legionaries. And if you ever come across the term the Avenger of Blood in the Old Testament, you're looking at an example of mob rule. The Avenger of Blood was what they called the posses that formed when a community felt it had been wronged in some way. So the Hebrew version of the hue and cry. Not a thing for minor crimes, like the hue and cry. Most of the passages have to do with murder. Police are different. They emphasize crime prevention, not just response. And they effectively take a snapshot of the community's standards and then apply resources according to those standards. This means that police departments in different communities can be very different from one another. For instance, the city of New Orleans formed out of a community, very French, very Catholic, and very much rooted in the old European caste system. In that mindset, some people are seen as more important than others. Traditionally, their police department reflected this with a very uneven level of enforcement. At the other end of the spectrum, the city of Los Angeles grew largely out of the upward mobility of the 20th century and reflected a much more modern, much more egalitarian way of looking at the world. For decades, they were seen as the gold standard of modern law enforcement, deploying assets not based on who was important, but based on heat maps that showed the highest densities of criminal activity, no matter where those crimes were occurring. All of these police departments had chains of command. They had to. Someone, or in reality a lot of someones, had to gauge the public concerns and look at those changing crime patterns. Someone had to develop the needed assets to address those concerns. Someone had to come up with a set of instructions to utilize those assets in the most effective way. And someone had to be the boots on the ground. Every link in the chain has to function, or else the whole thing breaks down. Those boots on the ground have to be able to trust the instructions they're given by their supervisors. And this gets tough when you're deploying assets for something like a large destructive riot, because you have to weigh the needs to protect property. First, the needs to protect your officers and citizens. First, even the needs to protect the rioters. Ignore property, create a zone of destruction like they did in Baltimore, and property stakeholders lose faith that their investments are secure in your city. They pull out, and you get a city that looks a lot like Baltimore. Fail to protect your officers, give them no reasonable force options to use to defend themselves from the onslaught of rocks, bottles, laser lights, paint cans, Molotov cocktails, etc. Suddenly you can't hire or retain many officers, and the ones you do get have no desire to do actual law enforcement, and a city like Portland that used to be idyllic is starting to turn into a bloodbath. Now, Enter the twilight zone of our modern world. Step 1. Modern media, whose business model has devolved into posting rage bait for maximum clicks and shares, publishes something off-putting meant to get everyone's blood boiling. So much so that all I have to do is go to today's news feed, scroll down just a bit, and pull this screenshot. Does the department's administration agree that this event, whatever it is unacceptable? Maybe. Is there context we're leaving out? Probably, but that doesn't matter. You want to stay relevant? You have to feed people's sense of victimization, and there's plenty of media outlets lining up to do this. Step 2. A mob of the perpetually aggrieved forms on the other side of the country. What does this city have to do with the other city and their off-putting incident? Nothing. What does the Walgreens in this city have to do with injustice anywhere? Doesn't matter. Suddenly, a city like Austin has to protect life and property, like in this article. The response starts with a set of engagement rules. Those rules get set by the administration, including the chief of police. Supervisors then implement these rules. They manage the scene and they give moment-by-moment instructions on which munitions to use and in what way. In Dallas and Austin, the charges against these officers don't just ignore that reality. They make a mockery of police work and the American justice system. Name one other crime where the subordinate commits an offense when they do what they're told, but the supervisor bears no responsibility for giving the order. And not just that. These officers are charged with aggravated assault, a crime that states that the person intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly caused serious bodily injury, or in this case, what they're going for here, used or exhibited a deadly weapon. Did these officers mean to cause serious bodily injury by firing rubber bullets and bean bags, which are specifically designed to minimize the risk of serious bodily injury? How are we calling those deadly weapons when they were designed not to kill? So, what lesson does this teach us? Let me rephrase. Imagine you go into work tomorrow. You do everything your boss tells you to do, exactly the way you're told, and at the end of the day, your boss condemns you to authorities and tells the media, I can't believe they did what I told them. All right, what lesson did you just learn? The expression, feet of clay, comes from the biblical vision in Daniel chapter 2. In modern usage, it's come to refer to an otherwise admirable person who is also a deeply flawed human being. But that's not what the vision referred to. No, that vision symbolized a nation built up on a worldview that allowed for an advanced, complex society, which then succumbs to a more decadent, more self-centered worldview, and all of a sudden can't support that society anymore. Thus, the feet of brittle clay, which leads to social breakdown. All through the 18th, 19th, 20th centuries, we saw this breakdown, but for a very different reason. During that time, kingdoms that were like our city of New Orleans, based on caste systems, got replaced by more advanced egalitarian beliefs. But before those revolutions came, there was a twilight period where civil authority rapidly declined. The king or czar or whatever was still giving orders, but those orders weren't being carried out. We're starting to see that now. What lesson did the officers learn in Austin, which already cut its budget by the largest percentage of any department in North America and now is prosecuting more of its own officers than any department in North America? They've learned they can't trust the process. Our country used to subscribe to a worldview that brought with it a particular work ethic, a particular sense of obligation to one's community that geared towards a particular family structure. That worldview allowed us to form a tremendously complex society. Now, we live in a world of narcissism with no sense of obligation to anyone but ourselves. And I've said this before, but it's not going to be like the Russian Revolution or the French Revolution this time. Because this time, we're not going from one sense of community organization to a different sense of community organization. No, this time, we're going to no organization. And we all get to watch while any structure based on complex interactions of individuals falls apart, and the whole system just becomes more and more chaotic. More and more a world where nothing works right. A world where the president can issue a set of procedures, but the troops in the field might just tell the border chief to take those procedures and shove them. For Austin PD, I don't think there's going to be a mass walkout or anything like that. No, too much organization required for that. Too many people these days acting in only their own best interests. But watch what happens the next time there's a riot. I'll bet everyone in that department has a gambler's mentality. I'll bet they're playing the odds. I expect a good number of them won't show up for work at all next time it happens. They'll call in sick or claim injury. The ones who do, will any of them be willing to engage the rioters to keep them from burning down the city? We'll see. This is David Reich at From the Bunker. Click like and subscribe and click the notification bell, and we'll try and keep the videos coming. Also, see the link below to order Book 1 of the Holocaust Engine series, our pandemic post-apocalyptic horror that won the Pinnacle Award for the best science fiction novel of 2020.